Okay, so the first step is understand that pricing objective. Okay, sometimes you're just trying to survive. Sometimes you're trying to maximize your current profit. Look, if you're a company and you're in an industry and you're sunsetting the industry and you expect to be out of it in a year or two, well, maybe, today is the day you're going to make as much as you possibly can, before you exit the market. But if you're going to be in the industry for a long period of time, sometimes it's really not about the profitability, but it's about sharing that value with your customers. Okay, so there's various strategies or objectives that one has to their pricing and their pricing policy. Now, the second one here is you need to understand the demand for your product. Okay, understand what makes the customer sensitive or the consumer sensitive. Okay, estimate the demand curve and what might cause the demand curve to shift. Okay, if all of a sudden there's a ban on a competitive product, all of a sudden there's an ecological change, will the demand go up at every price level? Will the demand come down at every price level because there's no substitutes out there or something like this? So we also want to understand, what does the demand curve look like for our product? Now, the third step is we want to determine our cost behavior. Okay, now all firms have costs. But what your costs are made up with or made up of will often depend how you price. Now look, if you have a lot of fixed cost, that is, you have a plant, you have equipment, you have a cost all the time that has to be used, then you're trying to do what? You're trying to increase volume. Right? If I have a manufacturing plant and it costs me $10,000 every month, whether I use it or not, well, I want to run as many units as I can through it. If I run 10,000 units through it, okay, in a month, I realize $10,000 cost, 10,000 units, I have a cost on every unit of fixed cost of $1. On the other hand, if I run 1,000,000 units through there, okay, my fixed cost goes down by a magnitude of 100, okay, or I have about a penny. Okay, so these are the kind of things where, you want to understand, what is my fixed cost? Also, you want to understand your variable cost. So how much does your cost vary? Now look, if you have a high variable cost, what is your goal? Your goal in your pricing is to try to do what? Maximize the contribution on every unit that you sell. I have a high variable cost, but I charge more than my variable cost is. Try to maximize the contribution. On the other hand, when I have a high fixed cost, I'm trying to maximize the number of units or the volume. Other things we have to keep in mind is our experience curve. What does it look like? How does it fall? At what price or what production levels do I all of a sudden start to see this decrease or decline in my cost structure? And also, over what range of production levels do I have these costs? For instance, suppose that with one shift at your factory, you can produce 100 units. But if you start selling or you start pricing with the idea that you're going to sell 105 units, every unit over 100, you have to put on a second shift, or you have to start paying overtime to your workers. Now you realize that beyond 100 units, I have what? I have this price jump or this cost jump. That's going to mean I have to price at a higher price to have the same margin level. So one of the things we always have to keep in mind is our cost structure. How fixed is it? How variable is it? Over what ranges am I going to see these costs? Are there certain points, which we call break points, where all of a sudden the model changes? I have to put on a second shift. I have to build a new factory. I have to, right? If that's the case, then what I have to do is I have to price accordingly. And the other thing is experience. At what point do I start seeing my costs go down because I'm producing so much? Okay? All right, now the next one is we have to understand what? The competitor's price. So while we're doing a lot to understand our own price, we have to also recognize it's a competitive marketplace. We have to look at that competitor and we have to think about, how do they price? So what's their pricing policy? Are they looking to survive? Are they looking to win market share? Are they looking to be profitable? Okay, what does their cost structure look like? Okay, what kind of competitive reaction can I expect from them? Now, look, if it's a core business, usually they're going to respond strongly because you're in their core business, you're in their core marketplace. It's a market that they really care about. They tend to have a more coordinated response to anything that you're doing. On the other hand, sometimes you just nibble in markets that they're not interested or not worried about. For example, okay, there was an airline years and years and years ago, 30, 40 years ago, called People's Express. People's Express was the fastest growing airline in America, and it was the darling of Wall Street. Now, what happened? People's Express used to fly from Camden, New Jersey, Newark. So they used to fly from Newark Field down to Palm Springs, Florida. That was the only route they flew. Then they started to fly Newark to Charlotte to Palm Beach, Florida. And that was it. That was their whole market. Now look, they were competing against the national airlines. Now, the national airlines look at this competitor and they're saying, do we really want to react to this small competitor who's in one route or two routes? No. Now, what happened? All of a sudden, this company decided to become the next major airline in the United States. They started to fly transcontinental. They started to fly to Los Angeles and San Francisco and Chicago and Houston. And all of a sudden, what happened? Now, the competitors reacted because these were their money markets. These were their base markets where they had their volume, they had their loads, they had their profitability. At that point, they decided we don't need a competitor in our marketplace. So they began to lower their prices and they basically put them out of business. So sometimes you got to look at your competitor and say, okay, look, what's their price policy? What are they trying to do? Are they trying to win share, be profitable, survive? Okay. Or, what do I expect them to do? Now, how do you get this information? How can you go out and get competitive information on what it is that your competitors are doing and what you might expect from your competitors? Now, look, sometimes you can talk to suppliers so you know their cost structure. Okay, you can try and use the same supplier. Sometimes you take their product, rip it apart, and look at the materials if it's a manufactured product. Okay, sometimes what you might do is you might talk to the customers, okay, and they might tell you how they're charging or what kind of charging they're doing. A lot of times you go to their annual reports and you begin to look at, what are their margins like? What does their cost structure look like? But a good place to talk to is also stock analysts. Stock analysts will very often tell you an awful lot about what's going on with your competitor, okay? Or what's going on in the marketplace. They cover these firms, they know what their cost structure is like. So a lot of times we can go out to an analyst who covers the industry, and they often have a lot of information that is at hand. Okay. Now the next step is usually we have to select a pricing method. Now, this is really something that what is going to be the way in which I'm going to choose to price. Now, a lot of these are all kind of a variation of the same thing. A lot of people talk about markup pricing. Well, what is markup pricing? Markup pricing says I figure out what all my costs are and then I mark up. Now, why do people do this? Well, they can get a handle on their costs. They can figure out they can figure out what their costs are fairly simply. And then what they try to do is mark up from there. Now, this ensures profitability, right? If they can cover all of their costs. And it helps them to have a known kind of profit margin. And this gives rise to the second of these techniques, target return pricing, is that sometimes firms say, okay, it's not enough to just cover all of our costs. What we want is a targeted return. Okay, whatever our costs are, I want 20%, I want 30%, I want 40%. So what they do is they take all their costs, they bundle them all up, okay, and then what they do is they try to price at a price of 20 or 30 or 40, whatever the target is, % over that price. So it's a markup, but a targeted markup. Okay, now that's a little bit easier in concept than it is to get done because sometimes we don't know what our costs are. Now, how did I just say that? I don't know what my costs are. Well, remember when we were talking about fixed costs a couple of slides back, and I said that your cost is highly dependent on the amount of volume that you have. So look, if I don't know what my volume is, I can estimate what my costs are, but I won't get it right unless I understand exactly how much volume is going to go out the door. Okay, so a lot of times what I have to do is I have to recognize that I have this targeted return, but I'm never quite sure what my costs are going to be. All right, now the third thing is what we call, or the third technique is what we call perceived value pricing. What is the value that the customer sees in the product? Okay, what is that? What do they see as the value of that product? And what can I do to change that value? Now look, my problem with markup pricing, my problem with target return pricing is what? Is that everything is dependent on your cost. Now, is your cost in any way important to the customer's value? No. What your cost is has very little to do sometimes with what the customer sees as value in your product or service. You know, think about something like dental floss, right, that you clean your teeth with. Okay, when dental floss was first developed or designed, what was it used for? Okay, it was used to make ropes for vessels that were going across the big oceans. Now what happened? Well, they didn't want to use the old hemp ropes because the old hemp ropes used to rot with the harsh elements of the seawater. On the other hand, they didn't want to use things like steel because it was too heavy and the boat would sink down in the water and it would use more fuel while it was going across the ocean. So they wanted something that was lightweight and impermeable to the elements. And what did they come up with? Okay, they came up with this filament, which you clean your teeth with, okay, and they used to spin it into ropes. Okay, it was strong, it was impervious to the elements, okay, and that's what it was used for. Now, look, in that kind of a marketplace, an industrial marketplace like that, what did they sell it for? Something around $1,000 a ton. Now, let's think about that math, okay? There's 2,000 pounds in a ton. Okay, so that meant it was really something in the neighborhood of 50 cents a pound. Okay, 2,000 pounds in a ton, they're selling it for $1,000 a ton, that means it's 50 cents a pound. Okay, now what do you pay for dental floss when you clean your teeth? Okay, that stuff runs about $2.95 for a half an ounce. That means it's $6 an ounce, $96 a pound. Not 50 cents, but $96 a pound. Okay, think about what that means. We're talking about something that's selling at 192 times what it sells for in another marketplace. Now, one was cost plus pricing, the other was value. When you want to clean your teeth, okay, the value of having something lightweight that gets between your teeth and allows you to clean it has a tremendous amount of value. So this is where we spend a lot of our time in marketing. Now, one of the things that we need to do in marketing, and I'm going to just use a very quick example here, is we need to look at our products and recognize that there's a great opportunity to create value. Even for this bottle of water, you might look at it and I might say, how much is this worth? And you say, well, it's worth $1. It's worth 15 rupees. But if what I can do is I can tell you that this is reverse osmosis filtered to provide the coolest, clearest, crystal clean element for mental health and well-being. Wow. Now it might have a little bit more value. It might not be $1, it might be $1.20. It might not be 15 rupees, it might be 20 rupees. Okay, and this is what our job is to raise the perceived value. Okay? I always say that one of the things that we need to do in marketing is work with perceived value. Try to get that perceived value up. The higher we get that perceived value, the more we can do what? The more we can harvest. Okay? Now the fourth one is what we call going rate pricing. Going rate is looking at your competitor and saying, what can I charge? Well, it's largely dependent upon my competitors. Now if I take the first one, markup pricing. Markup pricing says, look at your costs, and that sets the floor for your price. Going rate pricing says, look at your competitor, and they sort of set the ceiling, right? Because eventually there's this competitor out there that if your prices get too high, they're going to compete with you and they're going to bring your prices down. So while markup pricing is largely cost driven, going rate pricing is much more what I would call competitively driven. Okay? On the other hand, where would I like to be? I like to talk about value. Okay? All right. Now, the next one is we have to select our final price. Okay? At the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, what are our present policies like? Okay, do I run an upscale shop? Do I run a budget shop? Do I have lots of services? Do I have very low and limited services? Do I sell things out of a cash and carry, out of a bin with no service, no help, no assistance? Or is it the sort of thing where I give you help at the point of sale? I consult with you. I offer you a long-term money-back guarantee. All of these kinds of things. Well, look, if it's the low budget kind of a operation, I can't charge premium prices. On the other hand, if I give you service guarantees, I give you consulting at the point of sale, if I make sure that I have limited stock, I promise you a 24-hour delivery, well, then I can charge you a higher price. Okay? What are the effects of our prices like on other parties? Look, if I raise my price, am I going to put my customer out of business? Do they have the ability to handle these price increases? You know, sometimes you want to raise your price, but you recognize that if you do, your competitor might lose their business. Or not competitor, but your customer might lose their business. Well, you never want to be in that situation where you're losing your customers. Okay? What are the psychological ramifications of this price? Now look, a lot of businesses, people know what the prices are. They've bought them all their life. Okay, in the electrical supply business in the United States, I can remember you would go into an electrical shop and they would say, you never pay more than 5 cents for a fuse. Fuses have been 5 cents for 50 years. Okay, and children grew up in the business and inherited the business from their grandparents, and they knew exactly what a fuse should cost them. Well, if you raise the price to 7 cents, everybody knows it. It's so psychologically understood that you don't want to violate that. So sometimes you have to recognize there's certain prices people won't pay. And what are the effects of my other marketing mix variables? Okay, what kind of service? What kind of promotion have I been doing? What kind of segmentation, targeting, positioning have I been trying to do with my entire process? Okay, if I'm trying to get upscale customers and I've been asking them to come to high-end shops and I've been telling them about the glorious, satisfying elements of my product, then do I really want to bargain price? Okay, I should be pricing at a higher level. So we need to select that final price. Okay, and then what we need to do is adapt that price. Okay, now how do we adapt that price? Sometimes we charge different prices to different geographies. We might have promotional discounts where sometimes what we do is we say, look, if you buy early, you get it at a lower price. If you pre-order, we're going to give you a better price. If you buy in a large lot size, we're going to give you a better discount. So we have certain discounts and alliances or promotions that might help us to get the product bought, sold, recognized. So sometimes we use price as a way of attracting interest, of creating demand, because we give them a deal on what people normally expect to be the price for our goods or services. And sometimes what we do is we discriminate. What is discriminatory pricing? Well, discriminatory pricing is that I'm going to charge two different customers different prices. Think about that. Discriminatory pricing. I want to charge two different customers two different prices for the same product or the same service or something close to the same product or close to the same service. Now, this is one of our great weapons, is what I call discriminatory pricing. One of the difficulties we run into is that, when we look at a market, okay, we generally find that the marketplace has different segments. So looking at this graph, you might have segment A, B, C, and D. Now, D sees the highest value. A sees the lowest value. Now, what we could do is we could set the price right here at 0.1. Now, if we do this, what happens? Unfortunately, we miss segment A. Okay, we completely miss them. The price is too high. But C and D, and even B, see more value in the product than the price we're charging. So what we're doing is we're leaving all of that value on the table. We're not extracting it from the marketplace. C and D are willing to pay more than we're charging. Now, how do we do this with the same product? So let me give you 3 different techniques that we sometimes use. Okay? The first one, but recognize that why do we do it? Because we're trying to execute our price in the marketplace. Now, generally, we're doing this for a couple of reasons. Sometimes we want to gain a greater market share. So what we do is we adapt our price or we discriminate with the idea of gaining more market share. I want to make sure that C, D, B, and A are all buying from me. But if I come up with one price policy, I'm going to miss that big segment in A. Okay? So sometimes I want to gain more market share. Sometimes it's about that margin. Okay? Is that how do I gain more margin? Okay, not just getting A in there, but making sure that I collect all that margin from C and D, but also make sure that I have that volume that A provides me. Okay, now what are we trying to do with this price execution? Well, sometimes we're using it to meet the needs of the marketplace. Different customers have different needs. They're willing to pay different prices. They have different budgets. And the other thing is sometimes we're looking to smooth out our capacity. Think about this. You know, if I were to go to a restaurant in your major metropolitan, well, let's just say I'm going to go to a restaurant in Delhi, India, or Makati, the Philippines, Makati, Manila, or I'm going to go to a restaurant in Bangkok, Thailand. What's the typical dinner hour? Well, you might say, okay, well, look, everybody goes to dinner from 7:30 to 8:30, or 7:30 to 9 o'clock. The restaurants are full. Look, aside from that, the restaurants aren't very full. So what could we do? Well, what we might do is say, look, it's full price from 7:30 to 10 o'clock at night. But if you come to the restaurant before 6 and you leave before 7:30, we discount the menu 15%, 20%. A lot of people call these happy hour pricing. This is a way of doing what? Smoothing out capacity. A time when you didn't used to be busy, trying to generate demand by doing what? Lowering your prices and smoothing out that capacity. Okay? Now, 3 common ways in which we do this. The first one is an offer configuration. Okay, can we change the offer to 2 different customers? So one customer might say, you know what, I want television service, and I want to be able to watch television. Say, okay, great. And here's a service, and you can get all of the local channels, plus you can get 5 news channels, and you can get 5 comedy channels. Okay? Now, somebody might say, well, you know, I want the sporting channels. I want to be able to watch English Premier League football, or I want to watch La Liga football. Well, now what they do is they say, okay, well, we have a second offer over here. It costs the same as the first plus 20%, but we throw in all of the sports channels. Okay, the offer is different. So for that group of people that wants to watch those sports, what we're going to do is we're going to give them a different price. And then we have a third group that says, well, and I like cooking too. And I want to be able to watch movies on demand. And I want to be, now this is all what we call changing the offer or reconfiguring the offer. So one group of people get the slimmed down product. You have got television service. You can watch the news, you can watch the local channels, you can watch the simple TV that is domestic. Okay, on the other hand, if you want to be able to watch international sporting events, if you want to be able to have movies on demand, if you want interactive TV, if you want the latest and greatest out of Bollywood or Hollywood or wherever you're coming from, okay, then what we're talking about is a very different service level. So reconfigure the offer. Different groups need different things. Now, what you might find is A over here is happy with just a simple television service or a simple cell phone service. On the other hand, C and D want all of the channels, or they want call forwarding, call holding, talk and text, whatever it is, they have different services that they want to have. So you change the offer. The third one is we can put in price fences. Now, what is a price fence? A price fence defines a clear trade-off between the different markets. So I have the same product, okay, but the customers have different characteristics, okay? And what I'd like to do is I would like to be able to control my cost or my price based on the different behaviors that the individuals consume or exhibit. Now look, if I think about a seat on an airline, okay, the seat is the seat is the seat. Now, if you want to buy an airline ticket and you want to buy it at the last minute, you're going to pay a very, very high price. And airlines keep a few seats for those last minute travelers because they know that that last minute traveler is what? They're price insensitive. They need to get from A to B and they don't care what the cost is. On the other hand, if you're on a budget, you need to plan and you say, this is going to be a vacation, it's going to come out of my pocket, okay, and you buy a month before or 2 months before, that's usually where you can get a very, very low price. Right? So the same seat might have 2 very, very different prices or may have 10 different prices, right? Depending on how available those seats are and how close we are to departure. You know, in my business, I'm the dean of a business school, right? And I run recruiting. We might have 3 different prices for the same degree. So we offer an MBA degree, but we have one price for our in-state students, one for our out-of-state students, and one for out-of-country students. It's the same degree, but they have different characteristics to the customer. We call these price fences. Okay, and the last one here is modifying metrics. Okay, now sometimes what we want to do is we want to change the way in which we price. Okay, so you know, for different groups, we might offer different types of prices. And I would often say that this is one of the ways in which we can really change a marketplace. So think about something like advertising. Okay, when I began my career, advertising was all about the number of lines on a page or the amount of space you took on a billboard or something along those lines. Today, you know, in the internet world, what do they charge you on? They charge you on the number of people who viewed it or exposures, the number of clicks, click-throughs, click to purchase. Okay, all of these different types of metrics that have come about to charge differently for what is essentially the same service. You're still hoping to attract people's attention, but instead of charging them for the services you rendered of having built an ad, what you're doing is you're charging them for the activities that the marketplace responds with. This was a way of sharing the results between the 2 different firms. You know, similarly, if I were to look at a hospital, let's say, and we were to look at how you price for something like oxygen. Okay, now you would say, how should I price you for oxygen usage while you're in the hospital? Now, you could say, okay, what we're going to do is price you on per canister or the amount of oxygen that you sucked into your lungs while you were ill. Now, if that was the case, who is going to suck down the most oxygen? Well, probably big people, people in their prime, young people who are in their 20s and 30s. This is when they're at their peak physical condition, their lung capacity is the greatest, and they'll probably consume as much oxygen during that time period as at any other time. On the other hand, who are your most fragile people that use very, very little oxygen? Okay, that are probably your most expensive people to treat. Maybe things like premature babies or the elderly, where they have diminished lung capacity or very, very small lungs. Well, those people are going to put that mask on and they're not going to consume much oxygen. Even the tanks are smaller. So do you want to be charging them on a per tank, or would you like to be charging them for time under the mask? Okay, so a lot of times what you need to do is look at how can I change the metric. Now, very often for firms have capital expenditures and operating expenditures. So if I were to try to sell you a truck, okay, and I come to you and I say, hey, do you need a truck this year for your business? You know, you look at me and you say, oh, yeah, we do need a new truck, but you know what? That's going to cost $100,000, and that's a capital expenditure. And I just don't have it in my capital budget this year to buy it. But if I said to you instead, hey, you know what? Don't buy the truck, lease it from me, and just pay $200 a month for the next 72 months or something like this, or for the next 10 years. And what I'm going to do is I'll buy the, I'll take the truck, I'll lease it to you, you use the truck, you pay me $200 every month or $300 every month. It may be the same thing, but what you've done is you've converted from a capital expense to an operating expense. Every month that I have the truck, I'm paying this operating expense to operate the truck, but I'm not having to go out and buy the truck. Okay? Now, look, pricing is a critical element for the organization. Okay, I've got to tell you that, in my years of experience in pricing, I find that there's a lot of different pricing models, but I don't think people go through or think through the pricing process with a great deal of discipline, nor do they really bring together finance and marketing in the same room and get the two of them to think about how are we going to do this in a better way, in a more productive way, in a way that's going to be good for the customer, but also good for our organization. And also good for what? Those collaborators. Because again, it's always about, is it good for the customer? Is it good for our company? And is it good for our collaborators? Thank you.